Hi there, I'm Liz Whitehead. I'm a Supplier Diversity Mastermind and an ally to Outbosses.
Hello, Outbosses. Rhodes Perry here, and welcome to this week's episode of The Out Entrepreneur, a weekly podcast where I get to interview today's most inspiring LGBTQ bosses and our allies crushing it in business. And on this week's episode, we are welcoming Liz Whitehead, who is calling us all the way from Silver Spring, Maryland. So Liz, welcome to the show. Really excited to have you here.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So a little bit about Liz's background. She is the CEO of 12.5, a business development consultancy that helps diverse businesses get bigger clients and more of them. She is also the co-founder of Diversity Masterminds, an online course for business owners to learn how to leverage their certification to increase visibility and grow their businesses. So Liz, to kick off the show, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your business and specifically what it means to be a diverse supplier?
Sure, certainly. So my business started 3 years ago out of a need that I had seen over the previous 15 years for diverse suppliers. I started working in New York City, actually, for an organization called the Women Presidents Educational Organization in 2002, and I was certifying businesses as women-owned. And what that means is, what the certification means, is I was certifying that a woman not only owned her company, but she, in terms of the paperwork, but she operated, managed, and controlled the company independent of other entities. So women-owned businesses is just one example of a diverse supplier. And corporations, private sector corporations, are looking for diverse suppliers to put in their supply chain. And those suppliers can be women-owned, minority-owned, LGBTQ-owned, disability-owned, or veteran-owned. And in my work with women-owned businesses, what I realized was that these organizations, many of them started a while ago. NGLCC, which is the organization that certifies LGBTQ BEs, or LGBTQ business enterprises, is a little newer. But all of these organizations had the challenge of, they had these great opportunities, but business owners with their busy lifestyles and busy work styles couldn't always access those opportunities or didn't know which ones were right for them, and so weren't getting the full value of their certification. So I started my company to help diverse business owners navigate the very crowded supplier diversity space and stand out to those companies that are looking for them.
Thank you for what you're doing. I love it. And as a certified LGBT BE, it's really, really needed. And I'm so surprised when I show up at local chamber meetings, local LGBT chamber meetings in Portland with other LGBT business owners who aren't familiar with the power of the certification. It just is, there's more education that needs to be done. And I'm really grateful that you're doing that. And I agree. I think that there's a lot of space in the field that you're in, and it's great that you're filling it up and succeeding. And I'm curious for where you're at in your business right now. How have you grown since starting? What did you initially intend to do? And are things exactly as you expected them? Or where are the opportunities that you didn't imagine when you first got started in your business?
That's such a good question, because I can talk about sort of the nitty-gritty stuff that's a lot different than I thought it was going to be, and the overall 30,000-foot view, which is, changed from what I thought it was going to be. But it's certainly not exactly what I thought when I started. So I think one of the things that I realized pretty soon on, I thought I was going to, okay, what these business owners need is a plan. You need a plan. You need your targets. You need to just know what you're doing. So I'm going to build them a plan. We're going to work together for a few weeks. Then I'm going to hand them off, and they're going to go out into the supplier diversity world and be successful. And what I realized was, one, business owners needed to absorb the information I was giving to them in smaller chunks. So I could make a beautiful report with pages and pages of all this information. For the business owner, that was just more work to do, right? I was supposed to be taking stuff off their plate, and they were like, well, you need to help me absorb this and action this. So I got very comfortable with giving much smaller amounts of information, even though, I have this 20 years of experience and giving it to people in smaller digestible chunks. So I can do either a couple of hours of consulting, which I just call like a booster, like you pretty much know what you're doing, but you just need a boost, all the way to, okay, I'm basically your outsourced business development person in the supplier diversity space. That was one of my biggest learnings, which kind of changed everything from how I work, the way I schedule my time, and the services and packages that I offer. And then on a broader perspective, what I realized was that, yes, obviously people get certified because they want a return on that investment. They want to make money from their certification, and they want to make it by connecting with big companies and then doing business with those companies. What I also learned, though, was that there was a lot of space for building community within these groups, because even if you look at, the NGLCC and WeBank, which is a women-owned organization, or NMSDC, which is for minorities, they do a great job of building community within their space, and they get along well in a global sense with each other. But there's not a lot of connecting of those business owners with each other, or even explaining for women-owned businesses why the NGLCC certification might be important as well. Mm-hmm. And really, the leadership, is definitely friendly and works very well together. But I know I have a bunch of clients who are like, oh, I didn't know that I could go to the NGLCC conference. I didn't know that was a certification that I could get. So introducing people to that broader community has been something that I've recognized as another thing that I can do, and something I'm working toward in 2020.
Yes, I completely agree with you on that, of other minority chambers working together. Just kind of a microcosm of what's happening at the MMSCC, NGLCC, WeBank kind of coalition at the national level is local chambers are trying to kind of model that. And I know here in Portland, we offer kind of 3 chamber mixers a year, where we kind of, our LGBT chamber works with other minority chambers. And it's so powerful, just kind of that cross-pollination and just business owners connecting in a way where, aside from really trying to land those big kind of corporate clients, there's also a lot of opportunity business to business in smaller enterprises. And I just love kind of your vision of how do we leverage what's happening kind of nationally and encourage folks in their local neighborhoods to do something similar. And as I'm thinking about what you're doing in your business, I'm wondering, because the show is focused on LGBT entrepreneurs, what do you think those folks who are tuning into the show right now should understand about the importance of getting their business certified with the NGLCC in particular, that they may not know right now, that with your expertise and background, maybe you can change their mind or compel them to look at this certification in a new light?
Yeah, there's a couple things. From the practical side, there's corporations out there that are looking for you. And NGLCC, being one of the newer certification organizations, it's a relatively smaller community. So finding an LGBT BE that does what they're looking for is a little bit more difficult. And the corporations that are doing the best jobs want to meet the needs for all of these different diverse groups. So even if they have, let's say, a women-owned business, it's like, okay, we've got our women-owned business target covered, that they might be struggling in these areas in a way that you can help. So, that's sort of from the practical side. And then, from the community side that we were talking about, NGLCC is an amazing organization. I went to the conference in Tampa Bay in August, and it's a different feeling, even if you're certified by another organization, for example. And this is what I always say is like, get them all, get all the certifications because you get more exposure. But then also the NGLCC community is just fantastic. I went to one of the receptions, and me and my friend Joanne Ballady from Ballady Promotions, we were leaving the reception, and trying to get a lift was really wild because there were a lot of people waiting outside. And the mayor, Jane Castro, who spoke at the event, unveiled the city's plan to do more business with LGBT BEs while we were at the conference. She pulled up in her Escalade or her vehicle and was like, hey, you guys are at the NGLCC conference. Do you need a ride? Drove us back to our hotel, recommended a restaurant, and then she came into the restaurant and was like taking selfies with people in the restaurant. And I was like, this is the most amazing conference experience I've ever had. And it was just really great. And I've listened to your podcast, and I know you're a big supporter of NGLCC and the regional affiliates, and that a lot of the out bosses are as well. And they all describe this community aspect. So it's definitely both from a practical business perspective, a good thing for you to stand out. And then, just from a community perspective, it's great people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, 100%. And that conference is so much fun. And I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to meet in Tampa, but it's huge, right? I mean, there's so many people that are there, and it's such a great opportunity. And one thing that you mentioned about that ROI, right? Like getting certified and the expectation of contracts flowing in, right after you get certification. What kind of guidance do you have for, let's say for an LGBT business that is going through the certification process now? Say they go to the conference, I think it's in Dallas this year in July, like the end of July.
It's in Las Vegas.
Oh, Las Vegas. Yes. I knew it was somewhere hot. I was like,
yeah, always. It's close on the surface of the sun.
Oh my God. I know. It was, anyway, it was there a couple of years ago. I was like, it was very hot. Yeah. So say they're there and they're doing the matchmaker, and I don't know, they're talking to CVS or something like that. How do you manage their expectations about what comes after a matchmaker, or even how to prepare for something like that, and how to kind of nurture that relationship over time?
Such a great question, and I'm glad you asked. So I would say the main part of going to a major conference like that is preparing. So know the companies that are going to be there and know what you can specifically offer to those companies. It can be tricky because people say, well, I can offer everything. I can do soup to nuts for CVS, for a company like CVS or American Airlines. And what I challenge people to do is really think about how you can serve their niche problems. Not, well, I'm a full service this or that, and I can I can do all of these different things. What are the things that American Airlines is going to look at you and your business and say, that really stands out to me? I know we have that problem, and if you have a solution for it, that's going to make a big difference. And the key to that is preparation, obviously, doing your research. And you don't need to know, you don't have to have like a 50-page business report on each company, but just following their tweets for a while, looking at the things they have challenges with, and can you actually provide a solution? So when you present something to them, it feels custom. Mm-hmm. The other key to that is really narrowing down your focus. As you mentioned, there's a ton of people at these conferences, a ton of corporations that people can do business with. And when you narrow it down, it really ups your chance of being able to make a meaningful connection. Like you can certainly go and hand out 25 business cards and have a decent conversation with people, but can you meaningfully connect with all those people? Because it's going to take, in terms of managing expectations, it's going to take more than one follow-up email, and likely more than 10 till people really understand what you do, and you really get to that next level where they're like, okay, we're ready to move forward with something that you're doing. So those are the things that I would say to really prepare your mindset going into a conference like that.
Yes, 100%. And it's I like the analogy of it's like dating, right? Where it's a new relationship, and you're both kind of like trying to get a sense of who you are in the world, and if you like, know, and trust that person, and proceeding with going at the speed of trust, I guess.
Yes.
And it's very, very surprising. I know when I first got certified, it was like 2016, and that first conference that I went to, I met a ton of people, and in a few of those connections were really deep and meaningful. And it took I don't know, maybe 18 months for a substantial contract to come out of that. And it was great. It was just kind of out of the blue because of that connection, my company was kind of top of mind, right? And so it's just patience is everything. And so I wanted to ask that question for you. I love the guidance that you shared, and just kind of for folks tuning in, it's not a transactional thing, that you've got to invest your time and be intentional about those connections that you make. Something else that, things have changed since 2016. And I know in March of that year, when I was first getting started in my own business, the Small Business Association under the Obama administration was working pretty closely with the NGLCC to go around the country to local chambers to communicate the value of the LGBT BE certification. Since that time, different administration, different focus in the Small Business Association, not really doing that work right now. I'm wondering, from your perspective in the business that you're doing, what opportunities do you see for businesses like yours to continue with resourcing LGBT business enterprise in the absence of the Small Business Association really getting the message out about the resources that are available for LGBT business owners in particular?
Yeah, I mean, there's a tremendous opportunity because this is, like I said, NGLCC is one of the newer certification organizations in terms of NMSCC or WeBank. It's really, I think NGLCC is really, they've taken those lessons that they learned from the other organizations and determined, okay, this is what we're going to do and this is what we're not going to do so we can stay nimble and flexible. And to get what I think one of the key things to get the word out is that, you know, if you have one of these other certifications and you qualify for the NGLCC certification, it is an incredibly vibrant community. So again, working with those other organizations to say, hey, this is something that you want to, and the corporations are looking for it again. They might say, you know, if you're a woman-owned business and you qualify for NGLCC, well, they might have a woman-owned business in your category, but they don't have an LGBTBE in your category. Mm-hmm. So those are the kind of things where people are like, oh, I didn't want to necessarily do double duty. I figured I had it covered. But just looking at, you know, trying to get the word out that there's a lot of different opportunities here. And the NGLCC, too, does a tremendous job of connecting people internationally. It's a great international network that certified BEs can tap into. And I worked for We Connect International, which is the organization that certifies women outside the U.S. But one of our strongest supporters and allies there was the NGLCC, because there's an existing infrastructure already there in terms of the affiliates. So getting the word out about those things is really important. I was just talking to a business owner who is looking to do business in Europe, and, you know, and she's both WeBank certified and NGLCC certified. And she's like, oh yeah, the NGLCC has been tremendous in the international space. Just a ton of resources.
Yeah. I was very surprised at how expansive their network is internationally. And after the last conference, I ended up having the opportunity to do some business in India, which was amazing. You know, so it's just the sky really is the limit with the connections that you can make at conferences like these. And one other question that came up as you were talking about your experience with the mayor of Tampa Bay and their commitment of opening up government contracting with LGBT certified businesses. I know a number of states, largely from the work of the NGLCC and local LGBT chambers like California and Massachusetts, and some localities like Tampa Bay and even Louisville, Kentucky, are now looking at formally recognizing LGBT certified businesses as diverse suppliers within their own kind of goals for procurement dollars. And I'm wondering if you have any advice for places that are poised to work with local elected officials to make that case of why that's needed. I'm asking maybe selfishly because there's work happening in Portland and in Oregon State to try to get our businesses recognized by government entities. Hi, Outbosses. Rhodes Perry here. As you all know, part of my passion for this podcast is to empower you and fellow LGBTQ entrepreneurs to cultivate a feeling of purpose and belonging in your business, to know you can show up and be the most authentic version of yourself. Purpose, belonging, and workplace culture are concepts I take seriously in my own consulting practice. I'm dedicated to growing the belonging movement to empower leaders just like you, from the largest organizations to the smallest, to build healthier workplaces. That's why I'm thrilled to share everyday practices you can take to build more inclusive workplaces in my best-selling book, Belonging at Work. The book features some of today's leading diversity, equity, and inclusion thought leaders who share some of their wisdom, skills, and stories to give you the confidence necessary to stitch a sense of belonging into the fabric of your organization. To get your own copy of the book, visit rhodesonamazon.com. There you can find a paperback, Kindle, Audible, and hard copy version of the book. Again, that's Roads on Amazon.com. Together, let's grow the belonging movement. Do you offer any kind of support that can help make that case to elected officials? Has that ever been a project where local government folks have reached out to you to talk about that? And if not, do you just have any advice on how to approach something like that?
Yeah, I actually haven't. I certainly worked with some of the advocacy organizations when I was doing this as part of a nonprofit organization. But as a business owner, I've worked with, the local chambers, but not so much with elected officials. Mm-hmm. One of the things I would say is if your city, municipality, state, do they have a really strong MBE program, or often it's DBE, or like disadvantaged business enterprise? Yeah. So there's a little bit of economic disadvantage that has to happen as well. Like, do they have a solid program that exists already? Because if they do, then you're in good shape. Like, I'm thinking about New York City, right, which increases their spend every year with minority women, small businesses. And I confess, I don't know if LGBT businesses are included in that, but I would imagine New York would be a place, if it's not, that would be a good place to go, because they obviously recognize, they have the processes and systems in place, to do this. And that's oftentimes, as we know, with big organizations, with big bureaucracies, that's the biggest holdup. And then, two, they also are recognizing the value of it, that doing this business does have the impacts they want to see. With corporations, it's a little more straightforward, right? Like, we can point to studies that show that doing business with diverse suppliers increases their bottom line, which is what they're about. And yes, it increases their brand strategy. It does help with their PR to some extent, but for the most part, companies do it because they see a return on that investment in supplier diversity. Mm-hmm. With states and municipalities, you really want to see what is the thing that's going to drive those elected officials, what's going to speak to them mm-hmm. about doing this. And your NGLCC, your chambers, those are going to be really good resources for knowing, like, yep, these are the elected officials to talk to, yet this is going to make sense, or, this is where we are with that. Like, we have a little more work to do in terms of that. But I would say if they have a strong MBE program, there's no reason. And it doesn't have to be, like, if your municipality isn't it, maybe it's the state. Or the other group of industries that have a good program are those companies that have to do business with the federal government, this kind of quasi-governmental industries like the utilities, mm-hmm. sanitation commissions, and things like that, who, again, are familiar with this because they get federal dollars and things like that, so they have to report that to the federal government. And it's just a matter of, we want to be more inclusive in our program.
Yeah, and that's a great example. And for government entities at the state level, I mean, in California with the utility companies, that's where recognizing LGBT certified businesses was one of the biggest victories early on in this work, largely done by the NGLCC. So I think that your guidance here is really, really helpful. And one follow-up question, and it goes back to the great kind of coalition work happening with the minority chambers at the national level, is working together to advance different policy priorities that might be different between one chamber and the next. And this is something that Justin from the NGLCC often talks about, of kind of working in coalition to compel either corporations that have really robust supplier diversity programs, or even with certain governments, around pushing to increase the spend, like what you were talking about, year after year, rather than having chambers get recognized for their particular certification and then in a more kind of scarcity mindset competing against each other for a small pie. And so I'm wondering, and again, this is maybe a little selfish in terms of like strategy out here in Oregon, is that something that you would recommend, like working in coalition with other minority chambers, in particular also looking at businesses that are certified with folks who have disabilities that are also not recognized in a number of states, to both press for recognition of those certifications and at the same time also press for the increase of spend on diverse suppliers? Or do you have other kind of ideas or strategies that could be compelling for those decision makers?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a great point. which is like, okay, well, what if our municipality or our state doesn't have a robust program? So how do we get going there? And I think on a global level, these organizations, as we mentioned, all participate really well together, and advocating for the city or the state to spend more with diverse suppliers is something that I think a lot of them would be on board with. So I think they'd be tremendous allies. I think they probably, again, in terms of procurement, it can get kind of niche in terms of who knows about procurement, which of the legislators really get it, which of the legislators care about this issue. And your seasoned people who have kind of gone the rounds with the legislators will be really good allies for that, knowing about, okay, these are the people we talk to. These are the people who raise this bill every year. These are the people who sign on, and these are the people who don't, right? Because you don't want to find yourself in a position of making an impassioned case for someone who's sponsored that bill in the last legislative session, right?
Yes.
You want to know what the people are doing. So I think that's really powerful. And you mentioned the disability organization too, Disability In. They too are, in a relatively newer phase of supplier diversity and still looking for that recognition. So I think there's a tremendous amount of work to be done that can be done more effectively together.
Yeah.
I also think, I remember right after the election in 2016 was the NGLCC International Week. So they have a week at different embassies, and a lot of the advocates there and the corporate advocates talked about, if you don't have, as you mentioned, an administration that's fighting for these rights and fighting to expand these rights, a lot of times your corporate allies are the ones you have to lean on. Corporate America was then at that point was at the cutting edge of doing anti-discrimination policies. And while they might not, well, that's not the same thing, looking to the board members, the corporate board members who are on these organizations, do they have resources or advice for you or connections that can help? Because these big companies, they know from lobbying and they know from government relations, so they can also be, if you have a champion there, that can also be helpful also.
That's great. I thank you for walking us through that. I think it's super helpful. And just to get a sense, it's new year, new decade. If we look at where we were in 2010 to where we are now, really different landscape, and thinking about the next 10 years. So we're in 2030. What do you think will be some of the biggest trends in supplier diversity over the next 10 years that we ought to anticipate based on your own practice?
Well, I think one of the trends that I'm seeing already is that it's going to be more inclusive and not less. I think and NGLCC is going to be leading on this, that there's going to be, if you look at the disability groups and NGLCC, there's going to be more people who are included in these groups. And so that's going to provide a lot more opportunity. And at the same time, there's going to be a lot more opportunities for education on what that means. Initially, I remember when We Connect was just starting out, for example, people were like, well, now there's going to be a whole lot of international women competing for the same contracts. Isn't that not what we want? And there's going to have to be a lot of education and cultural work around, like, actually expanding the pie really helps everybody, and us working together to let's not just compete for that 3% that corporations are spending with diverse suppliers, but let's increase those percentages. It should be spending more because there's more of us.
Yep.
I think that's going to be a big trend going forward. And, I think there's going to be a lot more, there's going to be more and not less data around this and analysis of what actually the impacts are on these companies that do it. What are the brand impacts? CVM did a study about supplier diversity and corporations in terms of, I think it was something about 30 or 40% of companies are actually measuring their impact in terms of financial results and doing business with diverse suppliers. And I got to think that that's going to increase as they're spending more and, having to have a bigger percentage of their spend with diverse suppliers. And they're going to have to see, okay, where are we making an impact?
I like your predictions here and just this idea of more inclusion over less, and the idea that the spend on diverse suppliers will increase. I love it. I love positive predictions. How does that, yes, how does that translate to your business? And again, we're looking in a crystal ball, but based on these kind of broader trends in the space that you play in, how does that impact your business? And where do you see yourself in 2030?
Yeah, well, I think for a lot of businesses, right, probably a lot of the people who are listening, my focus is on scale. So just as I said, when I started out in 2002 working for one of these organizations and I had 100 or 50 certified businesses, it was relatively easy for me to sort of keep track of all of them and know what opportunities would be good for them. If we're looking at thousands or tens of thousands of businesses, then what's going to be important for me as I want to educate all these businesses and make sure they get the most of it is being able to scale that. And I think a lot of that is connecting the community members to each other to do business. So that's what I'm focusing on, is how am I going to scale to meet that demand of all these diverse business owners.
And I know that you have like a Supplier Diversity Mastermind. Is that like a foundational piece to that scale? Do you see that expanding significantly, or does this look a little bit different when you talk about scale in the next 10 years?
Yeah. So I have a Diversity Masterminds cohort, and it's foundational not only because it does help me scale so I can talk to a bunch of people at once with the same information. And then once they go through that program, I kind of know at a baseline what they know. So that's good. But then in a broader sense, what are the next steps after Diversity Masterminds? How do you really stand out to these supplier diversity people and corporate people in general? So me and my business partner are really focused on that, on how we're going to build that out and create content that people are going to keep coming back for. Because as I mentioned, you can give the people the plan, and then 6 months later, if you haven't actually done what you said you were going to do, what's the point? And so how do we keep people accountable and keep that information custom? Because that's the important part. These organizations are providing great opportunities. Where we come in is like the really customized support. Mm-hmm. So scaling that customized support is going to be our focus.
Yes, I really like that. And I wanted to transition a little bit. So we recently had a listener survey. It's open now. And we already have a number of listeners who've responded to it. And one of the questions that I asked the audience is, what are a few questions that they want me to ask guests like yourself? And they came up with a number of different questions. And there's two here that I wanted to present to you, and you can choose which one. It's a choose your own adventure as a guest. So,
okay.
But the first question was for you, what keeps you awake at night when it comes to your business? And the second is, what achievement are you most proud of when it comes to your business?
So I'll talk about the achievement that I'm most proud of.
Yeah.
And it's actually, so the process of working on Diversity Masterminds, me and my business partner came together. She actually provides a service where she helps people through the certification process. So we both have been in this space for a long time. We've known each other for 10 years. She used to live in New York. Now she lives in Las Vegas, but we've known each other for, a long time. And I'm really proud of the fact, always when I worked for organizations, I was like, well, one way you can approach corporations is to partner together and offer something bigger. And I recognize like entrepreneurs, oftentimes they're entrepreneurs because they don't play well with others in that way, right? Like I want to be the boss, right?
Yep.
So the fact that we've been able to come together and meld our two businesses and our two CEO brains to create something totally new. It's, Diversity Masterminds is a separate company. That's been really exciting for me, and I'm really proud of that. I'm walking the talk that I've been giving everybody for the past couple of decades.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's huge. It's very huge, and the fact that you were able to find another CEO, and I'm imagining there's some kind of rocket fire or rocket fuel dynamic of like visionary implementer kind of dynamic duo, but to make that mix work is super, super powerful. And I think part of it is, right, like having a shared vision and values that you can operate around. Do you have any guidance around for folks thinking about, I have this offering, I know that there's someone in my space that has something slightly different, and if we were able to work together, it would be amazing. What guidance would you give folks in that situation to make sure that, expectations are clear and people can maximize expertise and the power of working together in relationship?
That is such a great question. And that's something I'd really like to see Diversity Masterminds get into too, is actually making these connections for people to do business together, because it is really powerful. I think it goes back to your dating analogy in a lot of ways. Me and my business partner, Heather Cox, we got business married.
Yeah.
So when we our businesses share finances, our successes and failures go together, and that shared vision is really important. And to do that, you really have to trust the other person. You have to know them. You have to know that they share your values, and be willing to do the give and take. It's not another employee. It's a true partner that you have, and that's going to take time to develop. Whereas my company started 3 years ago, and Heather and I were able to launch Diversity Masterminds after talking about it in, I think, 6 months.
Wow.
But that 6 months belies the 10 years of work we did building up our relationship and our respective reputations, so that when we came together, we were able to do something really fast. So those are some tips. And on the beware side, I would say beware of somebody that overpromises, because they might underdeliver. Yeah,
totally. I really appreciate that. And I think it's helpful. I know from my own experience going to conferences like the NJLCC, in talking about how we leverage our certification, a big recommendation that staff from the chamber, gave was, you can enter into competing for contracts and working in partnership with other suppliers that might be a prime, or you're the prime and they're the subcontractor. And this is very different, but I do think some of the principles that you're sharing are similar, of making sure that there's clarity around why you're coming together to work together, that there's a shared vision and values. And I think you're right when you think about your own business and opportunities over the next 10 years, really giving kind of more of a roadmap of how to successfully navigate, whether it be partnerships between two CEOs coming together around some shared awesomeness that you're going to put out in the world, or even this kind of prime subcontractor relationship. I think that there definitely is a lot of opportunity, because while it's encouraged, there's not a whole lot out there of how do you actually do it. Yeah, I think you're onto something amazing in your own business. And I really thank you for being here, because it's been tremendously helpful for me. And I hope for folks tuning in, they're more inspired to look into all of the certifications that they might be eligible for. Chances are, if you're LGBT, you're a business owner, NGLCC is probably the first place you might want to go and look, as well as if you are a woman, looking into WeBank and the different national minority certifications that might be available to you as well. There's so many, so I'm not going to try to list them all, but there's a lot of opportunities. So Liz, I really thank you for this. So 2 parting questions for you. The first is, for those LGBT business owners out there, if you could summarize the value of certification in, this is probably very hard, but in a sentence, what would that summary of hopefully inspiration be?
I would say the value of certification is your ability to build meaningful connections that last with bigger clients and more of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you. That's a tweetable sentence there. So, and then the very last question I have for you. So all of the links and everywhere folks can find you will be listed on our show notes. My question for you is, what is the one place you would love for folks to go to right now, just to get a better sense of what you do in business and how you might be able to help LGBT business owners?
I would love for people to go to diversitymasterminds.com and check out the cohorts we're offering. And for your listeners, I'm offering a $250 discount if they take any of the cohorts, and they just have to enter Rhodes Pod at checkout, and they'll get that discount, because I'd love to see the LGBT BEs really hit the ground running and make a lot more money with their certification.
Yes, that's amazing. Thank you so much for that generous gift. And for folks tuning in, please, come on. This is a golden opportunity here. So definitely check that out. And Liz, thank you again for that really generous gift. I appreciate that. And I'm sure
my pleasure.
So many folks tuning in do as well. So thank you. Thank you for being on the show. And for folks tuning in, thank you for being here again this week. You know that the show is coming to you every Tuesday morning of every week, and hopefully giving you lots of good things to think about as you grow your own businesses. If you want details from today's conversations, and importantly, if you'd like to share feedback on what you like about the show and how we can improve it, here's something super simple you can do. You can text OUTBOSS, all one word, it's not case sensitive, over to 33777. Again, that is OUTBOSS, all one word, to 33777. And we will connect you with the show notes and in that listener survey. So thank you for doing that. And thanks for tuning in. And we'll see you next week. So keep being your authentic selves 100% of the time.